There was obviously big news of UFC Fight Week. Jon Jones testing positive. Allegedly, it's estrogen blockers. Um, but there was a day, the Pride Days, where the fighters were encouraged to take steroids, where it said in the contract, we won't test you, so don't worry about it. And nowadays, it's becoming a lot more stringent. I mean, do you think that this is a game changer for fighters?
Well, I think it's been around since the beginning of the invention of performance enhancing drugs. As long as somebody thought they could perform at a higher level, they want to do whatever they could take. The money, there's so much at stake, and then you're concerned that other people are doing it and you're going to be at a disadvantage, and maybe they're better at hiding it than the other guy. I'm not saying everybody does it. A lot of people do. I'm sure a lot of people don't. I know Boss is vehemently opposed to any sort of drugs, and there's a lot of guys that are very much against it. He feels that it's a psychological crutch. So not only when you take that drug away do you not have the same level of testosterone and aggression in your system, but you have that question mark in your brain, am I going to be able to perform at the same level in a sport that's so mentally driven? Because there's so many guys that have lost fights just because their mindset wasn't correct. So I think that
Do you think Jon Jones knowingly took something?
it's really hard to say. I like to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, to be honest with you. There's all these things about cross-contamination in labs and so on and so forth. I'd like to believe that he knows, that he's smart enough to know that with the testing now that's going on, and they can do random drug tests at any time, and they're using these independent labs, that he would be smart enough to know that they're going to test him, and he's going to get busted. So I can't imagine anybody taking that risk, to be honest with you. But I'm just maybe a naive guy.
And as far as even with the stringent testing, do you think that fighters will find a way to have masking agents of steroids? It seems to me that as long as testing's been around, there's always been a way around it, no matter how.
I'm sure, you're talking about millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and people want a part of that. They want to monetize themselves. And I think in the back of a lot of people's minds, it's not just cheating. They're concerned that everybody else is cheating, and they want to be in on it. And it's been going around for a long time. It was in cycling, and Lance Armstrong denied it for a very long time, and eventually got nailed and came clean with the whole thing. So, but he did it because everybody else was doing it, and if you want to be at the top of your game, it's not fair to have to compete. So I think it's very good that the UFC has implemented these very, very strict regulations, because it's going to hopefully keep the playing field even. Two guys not on steroids. I noticed a very distinct difference. The Pride guys in Japan, when they all came to UFC, Anderson or Vanderlei Silva, he just seemed like a different guy, And I don't know if it was the UFC jitters or there was something going on, And I don't know him, and I don't want to speak out of school, but I think a lot of those guys were doing drugs, and they just seemed like raging bulls. Their bodies looked different.
Well, I mean, the body difference is huge. But I tweeted out and went on air and said that not only when you get busted for PEDs like Anderson Silva or Jon Jones, do you get suspended, but I think that your legacy is there's some question marks. Like, where were you taking for your last fight, the fight before? Do you think it affects your legacy?
Well, I think it did with the baseball players. It leaves a big question mark. All these guys that were, home run kings and all of this stuff.
Barry Bonds.
Yeah.
Mark McGuire.
Exactly. So that I think it just, it tarnishes somebody. And it's hard to make that go away, because you always in the back of your mind, this guy cheated. He was competing against another guy that wasn't doing this, or at least didn't get busted for it. And that, it changes. It's cheating. It's against the rules. And I'm a guy, I follow the rules. I pay my taxes. I take care of my son. I take care of his mom. I just assume everybody's going to know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm not smart enough to cheat. So when you're lying and you're cheating, there's only one truth. There's a lot of lies and there's a lot of bullshit. So
now you saw Ronda rise to the top, and you saw the stardom coming. But as far as the UFC, or just not UFC, just MMA overall, coming to where it wasn't mainstream. It wasn't on TMZ. It wasn't even on ESPN's website.
Well, we got it on TMZ. We made it do it to the full court press. My goal with Ronda was really to mainstream the sport, not because I love the UFC. I love the sport since I'm a martial artist. I was really sad when I heard it might go away, And and I think the Fertittas did an incredible job. But my goal was to help brand the sport through branding a crossover athlete, which I think that we collectively, Geneva Wasserman, my partner, and myself did a pretty damn good job of that. Granted, we had something very special to work with, but you need a team. Yeah, you need a team. So I think that's what's driving guys like Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey. It's driving the $4 billion price tag for the UFC, and they're realizing that the sport is becoming more mainstream. It's not it's not just the 18 to 34 demographic anymore. It's broadened tremendously, which is going to broaden pay-per-view revenue and all the other sources of revenue.
So let me ask you, rounding out, is where do you see the UFC 1 year from now, 5 years, and 10 years down the road?
I'd be really curious to see how Dana and Ari are going to be able to work together. That's, I'm not saying they won't be able to work together. I'm just really curious to see how that plays out, because they are both Ari pretty much runs Hollywood and Dana pretty much runs MMA. And there's no longer going to be the Fertittas there to neutralize stuff, and we don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
So a year is it going to be like a transition period between Ari and Dana?
I think so. I don't know what's going to happen. Is Joe Rogan still going to be on? Because he said if it ever sold, he wasn't going to be part of it. But maybe he was assuming Dana wouldn't be part of it anymore. Right. So a lot of things, of course, things are going to be changing. I think in the long run, it's going to be better in terms of negotiations, because you're going to have a guy like Ari. They negotiate movie deals. Why can't you negotiate a fight deal too?
Right.
Based on the value and based on what, they look at box office. So in here we look at pay-per-view and ticket sales and things of that nature. And you can quantify a value based on the athlete. So I think it might end up being a better thing all in all for fighters and for management. Because right now there's management, we're pretty much impotent. Our balls have been snipped.
10 years down the road, obviously there's an imaginary crystal ball. Still cages, still mats, are the different weight divisions. What does MMA look like? Are there going to be multiple promotions? Is it just going to be the UFC?
I think at a point it's going to be a star-driven sport. Like you could take, before Ronda lost, you could take a Cyborg and a Ronda Rousey and promote that fight. I could do it. I'm not a promoter. Put together a team, partner up with Showtime, and get 1 million pay-per-view buys, and give, do it at $60 and let them split half of the pay-per-view.
Like a boxing model.
Like a boxing model. I think you could do that with stars at the end of the day. But the UFC is, and I think that's going to change at a point, and I don't know if it's going to be this Muhammad Ali Act, and some promoters going to say, hey, listen, I'll give you $25 million to fight, you know what I mean, and the UFC is not going to necessarily want to match that, and that could change things. That's where I've always believed. That's why I felt that it was a big risk for these guys to pay $4 million for a company when, at the end of the day, it's human-driven. Yes, it's brand. The UFC's big, but it's a man or a woman getting into that cage, and they're going to have a drawing power or they're not. And you're not going to necessarily going to need the UFC to promote it.
Last question before we get you out of here.
Yeah.
The one thing you're most proud of accomplishment, and I'm not just talking MMA, in your life, you're 53 years old.
Yeah.
And you can give advice to your younger you, and you say, I'm going to be most proud of this. What are you most proud of that you've accomplished?
I'm most proud that I'm a single father. I have a 12-year-old son, and I put him before everything else. I take good care of his mother. I make sure he has a good education. I make sure he has discipline. I make sure that I give him every opportunity to have positive self-esteem, and that doesn't come from giving them things, but it gives them from giving them opportunity. So I'm most proud of the father that I am. That's the most important thing I'll ever do in my life, is making sure that I have an emotionally well-adjusted, productive human being that I raise. And I think it's the most important thing that any parent will ever do in their life is raise a child.
And a follow-up on that, is there one piece of advice that you've given him, or say a young Darin Harvey at 10, 12 years old, what's one piece of advice you would give him?
Do what you love, find your passion, and if you do what you love, and I talk to him about this all the time because it applies to myself, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Darin Harvey, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.